I'm Marin, and this is Post-its and Pens. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Marin, and here you will find a little beauty, a little books, and a little teaching content. So if that sounds like something you might enjoy, I would love for you to subscribe and stick around and join me in my little corner of YouTube. Today's video is going to be a look at all of the teacher professional development type books that I am hoping to read this summer. So let's go ahead and get into the video. Now, I have quite the stack of books that I would like to get to this summer. Realistically, I don't believe I'm going to be able to read all of these, so some of these may need to be things that I carry into the school year. So I'm going to start with the ones that I'm definitely going to read this summer, and then we'll get into the ones that I would like to read if there's time. So that's how we're going to kind of structure this. So I'm going to start off with two books that are very, very similar. They are both by Debbie Diller, and they have to do with workstations or centers. So the first one that I have is Math Workstations, Independent Learning You Can Count On for K through 2. It looks like this, and basically it takes you through tips and tricks for creating math centers or math stations. So if you watched any of my Week in My Teacher Life, Day in My Teacher Life videos, I will link the playlist up above. I talk about how mid-year I made a switch with how I taught Eureka Math, and I started doing it in small groups. So I had 2 groups, and there were actually 4 groups. 2 came to me at one time, 2 came to me at the other time. So I had my 2 higher groups that would do the small group lesson with me, and then my 2 lower groups, the ones that needed a little bit more support, would come to me. And then I had activities that they could do when they weren't with me. So I think this will just help give me some other ideas of some activities that I can do when they are not with me, and kind of give me an idea of how to structure some things, because centers, rotations, stations, whatever you want to call them, is something that I tend to struggle a lot with. This group last year was very, very challenging. They had a very hard time with centers, even after we taught expectations over and over again. So I'm hoping that this will just kind of give me a nice starting point of things that I can try right from the get-go and make them a little bit more successful. And on the flip side, I also picked up her literacy work centers book. So same thing for grades K through 2. It's the same thing as this, except it's focusing on your literacy centers, which we also do. So I am one of the few that actually does math stations. All of us are required to do literacy stations. So I'm just hoping that these can kind of give me some tips and tricks. The thing that I like about this is it's broken down, but it also has portions, if you can see, that talk about reflections and kind of some questions that you can ask yourself as you go through. I like that it has pictures of different activities you can choose from. It's got materials, all of it. It's just very, very helpful. And then it also even has a section for how to differentiate each of the stations, and the math is the same. So I'm just really looking forward to diving into both of these. I'm going to do them in the month of July, a little bit closer, when I'm kind of starting to think about centers and stuff, and hope that they can give me some tips and tricks. So those are the first ones that I'm going to read. If you've read either of these, let me know what you thought down below. I would be curious. Okay, the next one that I'm going to talk about it's kind of an old book, but it's What Every Kindergarten Teacher Needs to Know About Setting Up and Running a Classroom. And it's this book right here. It was written by Margaret Berry Wilson. This was recommended on either Tara West's Facebook group or Simply Kinders. I can't quite remember. But last year was my first year teaching kindergarten. The year before I taught, well, I shouldn't say that. I've taught kindergarten now 2 years, but the first year we were virtual almost the entire year. So things were quite a bit different by the time the students came to me at the end of March. Last year was my first year having kindergarten in person the whole year, and there were definitely some struggles. So I'm looking into ways that I can make things just a little bit better in terms of teaching procedures, expectations, helping the students be a little bit more successful. I had a tough group last year. So I'm just hoping that this might give me some tricks, especially looking at like this right here. I obviously talked to my coworkers who had taught kindergarten for multiple years, but now that I have 1 year under my belt, I know that there's things that I can change to make things flow better. And I think this book will just be a good place to kind of go through and make sure I'm like checking all the boxes and thinking about everything that I need to teach at the beginning of the year. Okay, then we're gonna get on into some like classroom management type books. So I've picked up Whole Brain Teaching for Challenging Kids, 7 Steps to Teaching Heaven. This is by Chris Biffle. I do use some whole brain teaching strategies in my class already. I think this will just kind of be a reminder of everything that goes into that. Basically, he's laying out like how to do things in a more engaging way that will grab your students. So I love how like the title says, for challenging kids. That's definitely some of what I was dealing with last year. So again, just kind of a way to look at what my process is already and see if I can't add some like new things into it. So that's this one. Then I found How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen, which is by Joanna Faber and Julie King. They did one which was How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. This one is based on littles. So it's for ages 2 to 7. And again, I'm just looking for new strategies that I can add to my teacher toolbox to help make my students more successful, because what I noticed this year is they had a very hard time with what listening actually means. So they were like, well, I'm listening to you. They could hear me speaking, but they weren't thinking about what I was saying. So there was like a disconnect there. It was very interesting. They really had a hard time with listening in general, and that was across the board. Like the whole school really struggled with listening. So I'm hopeful that this book will give me some tips and tricks to try. This one's a chunky one, but I definitely think it will be super helpful. Okay, and then we also have Teasing, Tattling, Defiance, and More, Positive Approaches to 10 Common Classroom Behaviors, again by Margaret Berry Wilson. This is from Responsive Classroom. I'm looking at this one because this was a problem that the entire school was having, and since I'm kind of head of the PBIS committee, I'm hoping I can kind of take some of the things from here and kind of give them to all of the teachers in our building to help make everyone a little bit more successful and to help create a better school community, because it was a struggle this year, y'all, not gonna lie. Okay, now we're going to get into a book that I've actually already started reading, which is Other People's Children, Cultural Conflict in the Classroom by Lisa Delpit. This one was recommended to me by a teammate. She said she read it maybe in college, maybe a little bit after, but she said it made a really big impact on her. And basically this is talking about how to make sure students feel accepted and like they belong regardless of their cultural backgrounds. So my school is predominantly African American, and the way that they are brought up is just a lot different than my experience as I was growing up. So I feel like this book just kind of lays out some of those differences, like differences even in the way that their families think about school and expectations, and I've really enjoyed what I've read so far. I will say it's a tad bit dry, so I've been doing like a chapter at a time, and then when I started back to get my STEM certificate, I set this one aside because it was kind of the same feeling as reading like an article. So I have not gotten very far. I've only read this much right here. I still have this entire chunk right here. So, but I am looking forward to continuing to read through this. So I did do some highlighting. I've been doing some highlighting, and one of the things I highlighted says, how can we reach the worlds of others when we don't even know they exist? So it's basically just reminding you to think about how our students are just different than what we experienced growing up, or even what school was like when we were growing up. So I'm really enjoying this one so far. Again, tad bit dry, but definitely some very useful information, particularly if you teach students of different cultural backgrounds and the importance of bringing their backgrounds into your classroom to make sure everyone feels welcome and like they belong. And the last book I have is Shifting the Balance, 6 Ways to Bring the Science of Reading into the Balanced Literacy Classroom by Jan Berkins and Carrie Yates. This is for K2 specifically, but this is kind of talking about the shift that needs to take place in education to bring more science of reading things into a classroom that has relied on the balanced literacy approach. There's been a lot of research and articles done on science of reading. Lucy Calkins has even come out and said that she kind of messed up when she was doing her reading program, which we do not use, but we use Being a Reader. And while there is some phonemic awareness built into the lessons, there is not enough focus on letter sounds, digraphs, blends, all of that. That does not happen until you get into the small groups, and there really should be more of a focus on that with the whole group. And so this is kind of giving you some tips and tricks that you can use to bring science of reading into a classroom that is required to follow the balanced literacy model, which I am. So I have to use the district sanctioned curriculum, and this hopefully will just give me some ideas of how I can kind of incorporate some science of reading stuff into what I'm already being required to do. So that's why I picked this one up. There are several other science of reading type books that I would like to read, but this one seemed the most accessible and the one that had the best tips and tricks that I can incorporate next year. So that is a look at the books that I'm hoping to read this year. Realistically, it's not going to happen. So I'm going to show you the ones that I definitely am going to read, and then perhaps I can do a check-in a little bit later to let you know my thoughts on those. And then as I read more of them, we'll kind of check in and I can talk a little bit more about the others that I've read. But this is definitely one that I am going to read. It's nice and short. I don't think it will take me very long. And again, it's just tips and tricks that I can incorporate into what I'm already doing. So I feel like this one is a good place to start in terms of curriculum stuff, so I definitely want to read this one. I'm also definitely going to finish this one since I've already started it. I'm hopeful I can finish it this month, but it might go a little bit into July, so we'll see. And then the others that I'm for sure going to do are the What Every Kindergarten Teacher Needs to Know book, and then the 2 Debbie Diller books about stations, because I want to make sure I've got a lock on my procedures and expectations and things like that, and those books really help. So the behavior ones are the ones that I might push into the year. It's also going to depend on my group. Last year's group was very, very challenging. This year's group may not be. So I, am going to kind of base it on what my students need as well. But that's a look at the teacher professional development books that I am hoping to read this summer. We'll see. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to my channel if you would like to see more from me. And feel free to list other books that you found helpful down below. I'm always looking for book recommendations. And I will see you in my next video. Bye, everyone.